Hey everybody, today we're going to talk about how to choose the right font. I'm Daryl Girardier, and this is the Church Communications Podcast. Today's episode is sponsored by Pixel Faith. For 17 years, Pixel Faith has been serving churches of all sizes all over the world with broadcast-grade streaming and 24/7 live person support. I'm really familiar with the work because we use them at my church for the last 10 years, and they've been fantastic. Contact Pixel Faith today for a free consultation and more information by going to pixelfaith.com/podcast. Hey everyone, today we're talking about fonts, and I love a good font. In fact, I get super excited when new fonts are released. I'm that kind of person that I like choosing fonts. I think that's one of the fun parts of the job. However, I'm not trained as a designer. And I think a lot of us out here are church communicators aren't designers as well. We are people that are maybe marketers or video producers. We've got some sort of creative skill set amongst us, but choosing a font may not be something we were trained on how to do. So today I'm going to walk you through the 3 things I look for when I'm choosing a font or typeface for a project or a brand. But before we do that, let's kind of first talk through fonts in general. So you just kind of have to know that kind of the big 5 categories that fonts are broken down into. Category 1, handwritten. These are things that actually look like they were written by hand, hence the reason they're called handwritten. Looks like it's actually somebody's handwriting, actually writing something. And this has actually become a little more popular, I would say, in the last 5 to 10 years of having this handwritten font that kind of looks like it's authentic and natural and somebody actually wrote it out. Category number 2 is script. You typically will find these on wedding invitations. Anything that's a high elegant type of thing is a script font. It's not something you can easily read real quickly, something you got to stare at for a second, but it's meant to portray this kind of elegant feeling about it. Category number 3, serif. Serif is something that you typically would see like in the body of a newspaper or in the body of most copy in a magazine. It is meant to be really good readable copy. Mostly you would find it in the body of a paragraph, etc. And then you think of Times New Roman and Georgia kind of typically fall in those categories. And then you have sans serif, which is probably the most popular out of all the categories. It's where you find your Gotham, your Helvetica. That's what you would see in those type of things. They're usually really great for headlines. So that's the sans serif category. And category number 5 are display fonts. Display fonts are the fonts that are designed for a specific use case that thematically they speak to. So you may be doing something that's got a Western theme, so you want something that's a Western looking typeface. That's when you're definitely dealing with a display typeface. Okay, so keep that in mind. They're designed for specific use cases. And they're typically the fonts that are actually made the most fun of in the design world when you see somebody misuse them because they think it looks cool, but it really doesn't actually hit the actual branding that it needs to hit in that moment. So that is your display fonts. You can find them again all over the web, but they typically have very unique use cases. Now, when I am choosing a font, when I look at all these font categories, when I'm looking through all this, I typically know that I'm going to be living in either sans serif or serif world. Those are the 2 categories I'm going to spend most of my time in, and probably you will as well, because those are the 2 most popular categories of the typefaces. And there's a good reason for that. Your serif typefaces are predominantly what you're going to want to use for your body of your copy of a paragraph. They're really readable when they get smaller. If you look at most Bibles have a serif typeface as the body because it's what's actually legible when you kind of push the font down to its tiniest 8-point, 9-point, 10-point size. So serif is probably what you're going to be dealing with on some level. And then sans serif, Helvetica, Gotham, that's typically your popular for your headlines, or if you're building a brand, you want to do a logo. Sans serif because on a big block font, in other words, when you got it really nice and big, it's actually really readable, very quick at a glance. You can figure out what it is. So you're typically dealing with one of those 2 categories. It's typically going to be either serif or sans serif when you're building a brand or when you're doing a project. Not to say you won't use the other 3 categories, but that's typically where you're going to end up. Now, when I am choosing a font, I'm looking for one thing first, and that is readability. Can you read this? Will you be able at a glance to figure out what I'm trying to say? So that typically eliminates a lot of script fonts for me. I typically don't go to script font unless I'm doing something that I know a program somebody's going to have in their hand, or I've got to communicate this event is elegant. I typically don't spend my time in those other three categories. That's why I'm typically in sans serif and serif, because the number one thing is I need people to read it. There's no point in me designing something beautiful if you can't read it. So readability is the first thing I'm looking for, and it's what a lot of us overlook. That's why when we present our designs to others, they kind of maybe give that kind of like look, side kind of glance, like, what is that? And that's typically because you haven't made it readable. So sometimes I've got to give up a little bit of the design aesthetic to make sure that's readable, because readable at the end of the day is what I'm really looking for. Number two, I'm looking to see what kind of emotion this font produces. What is the emotional feel when you look at the font? And here's what I mean by that. Let me kind of break it down a little bit further per category. When I have got a serif typeface, the emotion it's going to emit is going to be something that's going to be like traditional, respectable. Think of it like academic, collegiate, if you will. It's got this reliability to it. All right. It's a sense of standard. This is tradition. So that's what I'm dealing with. When I pick a serif font, I know that's the emotion that I'm trying to emit. When I go to a sans serif font, the emotion I'm trying to get out of that is something that's objective, something that's clean, something that's modern, something that feels like it's in the now. Okay, so that's when I'm choosing those typefaces, is because I want to admit that kind of emotion when somebody looks at it. Now, when I'm dealing with the script font, as I talked about before, when I'm doing script, I'm looking for elegance. I'm looking for something that maybe implies creativity, but something that feels a little bit, for lack of a better term, high class. Again, I don't use this a whole lot, but if I did, that's the kind of emotion that I'm looking for in regards to that. When I'm dealing with the display font is kind of fun. It can be festive. It's designed to have a specific emotion in regards to the thing that I am trying to emit from the audience. So what I'm trying to get from them is that kind of emotion. So that's when I will go with that display font. And then lastly is handwriting. When I do a handwriting font, the emotion I'm going for is trying to go for authenticity. But again, I will tell you that one of the caveats with handwriting fonts is that if you use them too much, people can really quickly tell it's not really handwritten, and it is a font. And so that's why sometimes I really shy away from handwritten fonts. In fact, if I have to do a handwritten, I will actually get somebody to actually handwrite the thing and then scan it in and then put it into the file versus actually using a handwritten font. So I typically don't go there too much, because the emotion it's supposed to get out of somebody is authenticity, and sometimes I just don't think people are going to buy that. So those are the emotional things that I'm looking for the font. Again, I'm trying to find what's the proper emotion for the thing I'm trying to do. So to give you a concrete example, if I'm building something for the student ministry, I probably will go sans serif. Won't think twice about it. It'll be a sans serif font because I want it to be clean. I want it to be modern. If I'm doing something for a senior adult ministry, I may go serif. Why? Because it's a little more traditional. That audience is slightly more traditional, and it evokes a little bit more of an elegant kind of look and feel to it when you use a serif font. Or I may even go so far as to go with a script-based font if I want to go something like super elegant for, like, say we do a 50th wedding anniversary dinner at our church. I'm going to use that because that's the emotion that I'm going to look for to get out of that logo, that design for the audience. So that's what I'm looking for when I talk about emotion of the font and what the font actually does. The other thing I'm looking for is contrast. How will these, because at this point, I'm probably going to start pairing fonts together. If I figure out the readability, I figure out the emotion. I'm also thinking about pairing in terms of contrast. If I've gone with one font that's bold as the headline, the body may be light. If I'm going italicized over here, I may go, make sure the other one's non-italicized over there. I'm going to mix up the weights of the fonts. I'm going to mix up the boldness, but I'm looking for contrast, okay? I want to get a good set of contrast. I don't want my headline, big title, and my body to be exactly the same. There needs to be a visual set of contrast so people can kind of say, this is the headline information and this is the body information. I want there to be that visible difference between the two. So I'm looking for third thing I'm looking for is I'm looking for contrast. So it's readability, emotion, and then I'm looking for like a contrast between the two. Now, when I'm building a brand, I typically pick no more than 3 fonts for it. So I will have a headline font, like this is your major headline, what you're going to use. And this may be the secondary subtitle font you're using. And then this is the body. And this really applies definitely in web design. If you know anything about coding, this would be H1, H3 in body, or H1, H2 in the body. I typically will pick 3 fonts for a brand. I'd like to stick to 2, but sometimes on occasion it will need to be 3. So I'm going to pick a really good headline typeface font, if you will. Then I may pick a subtitle if I feel like I need it, and then pick a body. So I'm going to pick at least those three things when I am determining a font for a brand. So those are the things that I'm looking for in regards to that. So just to recap one more time, I am looking for readability, I'm looking for emotion, and I'm looking for something that's got contrast when I start pairing stuff together. And when I do all that, if I'm dealing with a brand, I'm going to figure out what's my headline, what's my subtitle, and what's my body copy as well. So I'm pulling all of that together when I'm building out a typeface or font for a project. Now, one last thing I want to end on here as I talk about these typefaces is that one of the other things I try to do is I try to go in the opposite direction of where everybody else is going. So if I see Gotham everywhere, I'm not going to use Gotham. In fact, right now I can tell you I don't like using Gotham. Why? Because everybody wants to use Gotham or Proxima Nova or any of those typefaces. I typically will go in the other direction. I will go with a big, heavy serif. I will typically kind of go in the opposite direction because I want my piece to stand out. I want my piece to look and feel different. I don't want to be crazy about it where it's unreadable. It's not readable. It's not evoking the right emotion. But when you're choosing a typeface, be careful that what you're not doing is just going to someplace and just copying what they've done, because they put a lot of thought into why they've chosen their typeface, and you just don't want to grab something and say, I'm going to be like this, because then what happens is you end up looking like everybody else. That's not to say you can't get great ideas from people, but make sure when you do it, you're being a bit original about it and you're just not copying something just to copy something. So I will tell you, when you see everybody going a certain way in terms of a actual font choice, go the opposite direction. In fact, my team just had this conversation as we were brainstorming Christmas. I presented some designs. These are the typefaces I'm thinking about. And one of my wonderful creative people said, yeah, what you just picked out, everybody's doing. In fact, they've been doing it for the last 5 years. And I was like, you know what? You're right. And she said, let's go in this direction, because this direction is someplace nobody else is going. And it's going to make us stand out. So guess what? We're going to go in the opposite direction. We're going to choose a serif. And I think it's going to look really good for Christmas. I'm super pumped about it. So to recap, that's what we've been talking about when it comes to fonts. I'm looking for readability. I'm looking for emotion. I am looking for something that's going to provide contrast when I pair stuff together. Again, I'm also looking for something that's a headline, a subtitle, and a body copy for my top fonts as well. So again, you'll spend majority of your time in probably your serif or sans serif world. You probably won't go to the other three categories, even though you may want to. I suggest stay away from those other three categories. They're going to provide you more headaches than they are going to provide you value for the brands and the projects you're trying to develop. So there you go. Thanks for watching on YouTube. We really appreciate it. Hit that like or subscribe button. Also comment below. We'd love to hear from you.